I test rode 17 mid-segment naked motorcycles in a week. So I'm splitting them into 4 groups, and in this video focusing on the ones that make between 80 to 100 horsepower and cost between 8 to 10,000 US dollars. Well, give or take. This is Roz. Let's compare some motorcycles. On paper, the Trident 660 makes the least horsepower in this mid-segment group, but every time I twisted the throttle with some gusto, the triple-cylinder engine impressed me well beyond the spec sheet. It strikes a very good balance between being a calm monk for a chill Sunday cruise, as well as an eager beaver for a spirited canyon run in the right hands. The engine is fairly smooth and I wasn't bothered by the minor vibrations, but I have ridden other Triumph triples that do ride smoother. The GSX 8S is the closest in peak horsepower, but it comes up a lot earlier in the rev range. The 270-degree crank mimics the torque characteristics of a 90-degree V-twin, and that makes it feel a lot more exuberant, even borderline rowdy if you really want to misbehave yourself. It's the only bike in this group with a standard bidirectional quickshifter, which makes downshifting in a rush a guilty pleasure. My initial impression of the quickshifter wasn't positive, but my friends who have tracked it pointed out that it is intolerant to lazy throttle modulation. For smooth upshifts, you have to be in higher revs, and for clean downshifts, you need to close the throttle all the way and grab the brakes before you click it down. The Aprilia Tuono 660 makes more power than both, but the optional quick shifter does like to be treated with similar respect. I rode the Tuono 660 factory that makes the same power, but the quick shifter is standard. As much as I enjoyed the sound and the feel of a 270-degree parallel twin, to me it honestly did not feel like a 13 horsepower difference over the GSX 8S. The engine does feel more powerful, but in everyday street riding, the difference doesn't stand out as dramatically as it does on the spec sheet. The minor vibrations, in my humble opinion, add to its exotic Italian vibe. Finding neutral, however, seems to take some special European technique, because I found that behavior in the BMW F900R as well. They claim 99 horsepower and 67 foot-pounds of torque, which I did test bombing around town as well as some highway runs. I love how friendly it felt and would make a great motorcycle for riders transitioning from smaller bikes to mid-segment. But I could not feel as excited about the BMW as I did with the previous 3 bikes that are a lot peppier for their size. By the way, the optional quick shifter on the F900R worked surprisingly better than the one on the F900XR I rode for the touring comparison video. After a Bavarian breakfast, I got curious about some Chinese takeout, which turned out to be way spicier than I was expecting. The CF Moto 800 NK supposedly makes only 1 horsepower more than the Beamer, and the torque is lower on the spec sheet. But as soon as I got on it, I felt like I was riding a hooligan from Europe that looked just as substantial as the Beamer. And very quickly I realized I was riding a KTM 790 engine, which had been tamed just enough to behave itself. Well, sort of behave. The shifter is annoyingly smooth, as if they're deliberately making Japanese and European manufacturers look bad. I will talk about the reliability and resale value when I get to that part of the video, but for now I want to point out, as soon as I rode the first mile on that punchy motor, my first thought was, this motorcycle does not belong in the hands of a new rider. And riding them back to back validated the fact that peak horsepower and peak torque figures that manufacturers claim rarely tell you how the bike feels to ride. At around 5 to 7,000 RPMs, the CF Moto 800 NK made me go, whoa, what just happened? And for context, my personal street bike is an XSR 900, which is the rowdiest bike I have ever owned. My track bike is a flashed and tuned ZX6R, which revs to the moon. And I still found the motor in the 800 NK surprisingly impressive. And then I rode the KTM 790 Duke at the very end because I didn't want to get arrested before completing all my test rides for this video, because that is exactly what's gonna happen if I had that as my daily rider. The 790 Duke is a proper hoon of a bike, not just because of the 285-degree crank Energizer bunny of an engine, but also because of the scalpel-like handling thanks to the geometry, suspension, and the weight, or honestly the lack thereof. The only thing I want to say about how it rode is that it takes conscious, temptation-resisting, sage-like discipline to keep the front wheel down. As much as I had a blast riding it, I cannot think of who I would recommend it to, when I get to the summary section of this video. Anyway, it does run hot as soon as you go slow. Vibrations exist but didn't bother me nearly as much as how wheelie happy that thing is. I did like the smooth shifter and how it lets you find neutral a lot more easily than what European engineers would like to let you get away with. Maybe the Chinese factories where it is made want you to take finding neutral for granted. But that's how most global companies are keeping the prices competitive in this day and age. Despite the lowest power, the Trident isn't the cheapest, but for overall fit and finish, the pricing is pretty competitive. Suzuki is actually a few $100s more. The Aprilia pricing suggests that if you want the most premium machine in the entire segment, you better have the money to afford this flashy exotic toy. And if you do have that kind of money, Simply Carbon Fiber makes this slim wallet made of real carbon fiber to keep you motivated for a motorcycle dripping in carbon fiber one day. Until then, you can show off this slim carbon fiber wallet and money clip which can hold 6 credit cards and $20 bills. I'm pretty sure it doesn't discriminate between Benjamins and Gandhis, so they ship them worldwide for free with a 100-day hassle-free returns policy should you start missing your traditional tuna sandwich of a wallet. I love the clever design that fans out the card for easy access as opposed to my traditional wallet that makes me fish for them with my non-existent fingernails. It features an RFID blocking layer that protects your credit card from being skimmed. A big thank you to Simply Carbon Fiber for supporting my tiny channel so I can continue my honest motorcycle comparisons without any influence from massive manufacturers. And that's why I can say with all honesty that the BMW F900R is BMW's best value for money premium motorcycle if you do not want the optional extras and like its easygoing characteristic. The CF Moto 800NK value proposition is insane for all the equipment you get with it. The 790 Duke is also manufactured by CF Moto for KTM, which has enabled them to sell the Duke at $1,300 less than what they were selling it for back in 2019. And before I talk about the equipment and electronics, let me cover the subjective part of the comparison: looks and sound. I personally find the Aprilia Tuono 660 to be the best looking because at the end of the day, I am a sport bike lover. But when it comes to sound, my favorite is the Trident 660 exhaust note, especially with an aftermarket exhaust. Here's a sample for you. Okay, hit the like button if you want me to continue comparing exhaust notes in my future videos. And while you do that, let me segue into suspension, brakes, and tires that complement the overall performance for the price tag. The Trident and GSX 8S suspensions are not adjustable in the front, but let you adjust preload in the rear shock. For street application, I found both to be pretty decently tuned for fairly sporty as well as daily around town riding. The Tuono suspension is the sportiest of the lot and even in base trim gets rebound and preload adjustability both front and back. The Tuono 660 factory I rode had fully adjustable suspension that was set up almost ready for an intermediate track day, which does seem to justify the price tag. But CF Moto 800NK defies that logic with fully adjustable forks, rebound and preload adjustable shock, and the lowest in class price tag in the segment. Even the KTM 790 Duke made by CF Moto for KTM isn't able to match that spec to dollar value ratio. Having said that, all these bikes have pretty decent suspension for street riding, and I felt pretty confident driving into corners, bombing around town, and cruising comfortably on highways. However, you do need to account for the limited suspension travel when navigating bad roads and potholes. BMW is the only one in the segment that gives you an optional electronic rear shock, which they call dynamic ESA. I did ride the F900 XR with one and was pleasantly surprised with the balance it strikes between comfy and sporty riding. The brakes, however, are noticeably different across the 6 bikes. Trident 660 front caliper is axially mounted and I wasn't impressed with the lack of initial bite. They eventually grab the rotor and do the job, but sports bike riders would complain about both lack of bite and feel. And I don't see how the braided lines are helping this bike. The GSX 8S brakes have noticeably better bite thanks to the radially mounted 4-piston Nissan calipers, but you still don't get the same brake feel as you get on the Brembos on the Tuono 660, which is the best braking setup in this entire segment. And even though the BMW calipers are also branded Brembos, the braking bite and feel is nowhere close to the ones on the Aprilia. And I'm not saying they're bad for street application, I'm just pointing out that there is a difference between Brembos on a track-biased Aprilia compared to a street-oriented BMW. The CF Moto 800NK and KTM 790 Duke have similar braking setup from J1, but KTM is just lighter, so the bite feels more urgent on the Duke. Tires are also differentiated. The Michelins on the Trident are my personal favorite tires for street riding. The Dunlops on the GSX 8S aren't bad, but if I ever bought that bike, I would switch to either the Michelin Road 5s or the Bridgestone S22s, which are the newer version of the S21s on the BMW. The S21s are fairly confidence-inspiring on the curves. The Pirelli Diablo Rossos on the Aprilia Tuono are quite honestly overkill for street application with that power. But if you do take it to that one-off track day, they will hold up pretty well before you get seriously fast. The Maxxis tires on the CF Moto and KTM aren't my favorite, but I really couldn't find a fault with them riding fairly spiritedly on public roads. Thankfully, brakes and tires are easy problems to fix. Just use the links below to get better brake pads and grippier tires, and voila, you have a noticeably improved ride quality and confidence. What adds to the confidence is that all the bikes have ABS as standard. Tuono has 3 adjustable levels. BMW wants you to buy an extra package if you want the ABS to be lean sensitive. But both CF Moto and KTM give you lean sensitive ABS as a standard feature. On the Trident and GSX 8S, you don't even have that as an option. Trident and BMW get 2 riding modes, rain and road, which I think is all you need. But Suzuki, CF Moto and KTM had to one-up them with 3 modes. With the KTM, you can also unlock a track mode for individually adjusting traction control, wheelie control, slide control, launch control, and power modes. But the Aprilia tops them all and comes with 5 riding modes, 3 for street, 2 for track, and 1 of each is user customizable. Traction control is switchable on all except the CF Moto, but the coolest party trick is quite honestly the cruise control that the Aprilia and the CF Moto get. In a day and age when even touring bikes in this segment don't always get it. All lights are LEDs and all dashes are TFT, but they do have varying degrees of user friendliness. For example, the Trident, Tuono, F900 and 800NK have dedicated mode buttons to toggle through the riding modes. On the Duke and the GSX 8S, you need to first toggle through the menu before you can switch the riding modes. Similarly, all bikes except the Triumph and BMW have a switchable bright and dark mode for display. BMW does have the biggest dash, by the way. It also has Bluetooth connectivity as standard, which is a feature it shares with CF Moto. Suzuki doesn't get that even as an option. Rest of the bikes do give an optional upgrade for smartphone connectivity. Interestingly, USB charging is also an optional upgrade on all the bikes except the KTM. However, the KTM, CF Moto and BMW did have adjustable brake as well as adjustable clutch levers to suit different rider ergos. Which brings me to ergonomics and comfort. At 5'8" with a 29-inch inseam, I couldn't flatfoot most of them, but wasn't exactly tiptoeing either. On the Trident and 800NK, I had both my feet closest to the ground. Taller riders should be fairly comfortable on all of them except the Trident and the Tuono, which could be a bit cramped from what I could gather watching taller riders reviewing them. Suzuki and the BMW look like the heaviest on paper, but I didn't feel any of them hard to move around or exceptionally top heavy. Going in and out of curves, the Trident, Tuono and the KTM felt really light and nimble, almost toy-like. The GSX 8S and the F900R or a little sluggish tipping into a corner but feel pretty stable mid-turn. The CF Moto is also pretty decently balanced, but the claimed weight doesn't feel right. It felt noticeably more substantial than the KTM. For me, the rider's triangle was quite comfortable on the Trident 800NK and the 790 Duke. GSX 8S is somewhere in the middle. BMW is a bit sportier, and the Aprilia Tuono 660, despite naked bike handlebars, is still pretty aggressive for naked. It's great for spirited canyon carving or a track day, but would get tiring on long rides. By the way, the Tuono and the GSX 8S seats are pretty sporty and borderline stiff. The Trident, Duke and the 800NK are middle of the road, and the BMW has the most comfortable seat of this lot. If you know someone who's wondering how one of these bikes would fit them, please share this video with them. You would also be helping me for the work I put into making this video over multiple weeks while I'm on a vacation. Now let's look at the cost of running. Most of these bikes claim 50 to 55 mpg US, except the Aprilia that does concede a lower fuel efficiency rating. The Tuono and the 800NK do have bigger tanks, which interestingly gives them a very close theoretical range before the tank runs dry. I checked Fuely.com and the BMW claim seems to be a lot higher than what the users are reporting, so I would take these fuel efficiency claims with a pinch of salt and start looking for a fuel station right around the 150 miles mark. Trident, by the way, is the only one that can run on regular gas. Rest of them have higher compression engines and prefer premium fuel, which is octane 91 or RON 95. I'm told that the BMW may also be fine with regular gas, but I would still recommend sticking to manufacturer recommendations to make sure you're covered on warranty. Speaking of warranties, since the Trident engine is a detuned version of the Daytona 675 engine, it requires regular service at intervals which are way longer than some Japanese motorcycles, which is also the case with the CF Moto and the KTM, which have similar service intervals. Suzuki is the most conservative and requires the most frequent service interval. The major service, which is a lot more expensive and often requires an expert mechanic, is fairly comparable across the board. Triumph continues to be the most low maintenance even in that area. In the US, Suzuki has the shortest warranty period, and the BMW is doing its best to assure people of reliability with the longest warranty in most markets. From what I could gather from ownership forums and conversations with some owners, Trident has proven to be fairly reliable so far. Suzuki's being reliable is a given at this point, but the GSX 8S specifically is too recent for enough data points to substantiate that perception. The Tuono that my friend owned didn't give him any trouble with electronics, engine or transmission, which are usually the garden variety Aprilia complaints. The bike did have recalls at initial launch, but there are plenty of people who haven't had any issues, including the ones I personally know who are racing them on American tracks. The BMW has had brake fade and some minor issues come up in forums, so you could research a bit more before you make up your mind about that one. CF Moto is a surprise package here. The 800NK, at least here in the US, is a brand new bike. I'm aware that CF Moto has been around in Philippines and even Australia for a long time, and some of their longer running models like the 650 MT have proven surprisingly reliable in those markets. So one could only hope that they are able to maintain the same performance with the 800NK, which theoretically could be a difficult task for an interesting reason. The 790 Duke had been riddled with electronics and engine issues when it was originally launched in 2018. It was made in Europe back then. The current CF Moto and 790 Duke is the same platform, and I would honestly want to wait and watch how both these bikes do in the next couple of years before I make any perceptions or comments about their reliability. Having said that, I do hope they turn out to be reliable because the value proposition of both the bikes is absolutely amazing in these times of global inflation and supply chain nightmares. If you own or have owned any of these bikes or their past models, I would 100% love to read your ownership experience in the comments. It also helps others in the riding community make up their mind. To summarize each bike, the Trident is a great value for money package. I love it for the exhaust note and just enough rider aids, decent suspension and tires, and quite a peppy engine character to welcome newer riders as well as engage experienced and returning riders. The few criticisms I can think of are the bulky tank design, some average brakes, and a bit too compact of a stature, especially under taller riders. The GSX 8S has an equally peppy engine. In fact, it has more of a V-twin torquiness to it. I love the simplicity of the dashboard and electronics, especially the fact that it has a standard quick shifter and decent brakes and suspension. But I'm not a fan of those tires, and the seat is a bit stiff for any longer than 100 miles at a stretch. The Transformers look also doesn't quite work for me. The Aprilia is my favorite bike in terms of tech and equipment, and to me the steep price tags feel pretty fair for all the equipment it's got. My apprehensions are with how aggressive the seating position is for a naked bike. In all honesty, it's pretty much an Aprilia RS660 with upright handlebars and minor changes, so it's kind of half pretending to be a naked bike. The BMW is a pretty interesting bike. It is a premium bike at a reasonable price, feels pretty sporty but not too aggressive. I'm pretty sure there are people out there who are looking for a bike exactly like that. The things I'm not a fan of are the reports of issues that I just don't expect from this segment, and the peppiness that the spec sheet makes you expect just doesn't show up unless you really get on the gas with some gusto. The CF Moto is actually a really good peppy motorcycle loaded with equipment and tech that makes it feel truly top-notch. The only con is that until CF Moto really becomes as popular in the US as it is in Australia and some Asian countries, it will be difficult to trust the reliability and expect a decent resale value. The KTM 790 Duke has similar pros and cons with one more addition. It is way too much of a hoon, at least for me to be able to behave myself. So in other words, it is too much fun than what can be enjoyed on public streets without getting arrested. So who would I recommend it to? I think to the guys who dislike my videos. At least in jail, they won't have internet. I'm just kidding. And if that is not enough pep for you, watch this video comparing 7 motorcycles with a lot more chutzpah and some old school styling. For the next tier of modern nakeds, subscribe so you get notified when I post that video. This is Faraz, helping the rider community, one video at a time.